Hi, folks. It's great to be back again. Thanks for the opportunity to Emmett and the Fortier Group. Um, I started a business about 15 years ago called Axial Networks. We renamed it Axial about 10 years ago. We provide a software platform to brokers and investment bankers that are selling companies. And the software platform helps them run a sale process on behalf of their clients. In the context of building that, we essentially built the equivalent of like a deal sourcing and lead generation engine for buyers of small American businesses. Our focus is $5 to $100 million companies in America, not exclusively in e-commerce. We're not an e-commerce specialist or even a tech and software specialist. That's one of the four primary categories where we operate. And so 15 years later, I've seen a lot of different sourcing techniques from a lot of different types of acquirers of businesses. We obviously have developed a huge amount of our own sourcing techniques at Axial to serve our customers. So I'm here today to try and share all of my secrets in 15 minutes or less. So bear in mind, just what I mentioned. This is not a direct to owner sourcing conversation. A lot of sourcing happens directly to business owners where the buy side will reach out directly to owners. The data that I have, the techniques that I'm talking about really are best understood in the context of originating opportunities from investment banking professionals and M&A advisors who are selling businesses professionally on behalf of clients whose trust they've earned. This slide here just quickly shows transaction closed activity on Axial broken out by buyer type. So as you can see here, more than 50% of the buyers using Axial are quote unquote underdog buyers. They're not corporate strategic buyers with big brand names. They're not super well-funded private equity firms. They could be searchers. They could be individual well-capitalized, accredited investors. They could be what are called independent sponsors in the lower middle market private equity category, which are professionals that raise capital on a deal-by-deal basis to make acquisitions. The reason I put this slide up here is just when you're an underdog and you don't have a big brand, i.e. like Pattern in e-commerce, thinking about your sourcing techniques probably matters even more. You don't have the ability necessarily to be the obvious top of mind buyer for a banker who's selling a business. And so thinking about how you will originate effectively is more important when you're an underdog than when you're the 800-pound gorilla in a particular category. In the American lower middle market, there are many, many, many thousands of brokers and investment bankers selling businesses. And the great majority of those brokers sell single-digit numbers of businesses each year, somewhere between maybe 2 and 5 businesses. So the tail of activity is very, very long, and the head is very, very, very small. There's a very small number of organizations selling in the tens or dozens of businesses in the American lower middle market. That creates a real challenge as an origination professional because you can't just rely on a half dozen relationships to show you the deal flow that you want. You need to be reaching much deeper into the tail of the market. And that's where a lot of complexity occurs. That's where a lot of elbow grease gets spent. And the old way of doing things or the sort of traditional way of doing things was exclusively through conferences, right? Exclusively through conferences and industry trade shows. As the internet as a layer for transacting has come online, there's now a real digital footprint that you can leave to try and help find deals and help deals find you. So that's what I'll get into here. These are some tiers and some different sort of tiering ways of thinking about it. To move quickly, I guess what I would say is that anybody who is looking to buy businesses but has a history of being in sales, you could think about buying businesses and deal sourcing effectively as a territory design optimization problem. You have many thousands of advisors out there selling many, many businesses. What's your plan to cover that territory? How will you organize yourself in the most optimal way? It's an infinite game, but if you're not thinking about it, you're definitely not even approaching the curve of optimization. And so realizing that you're really kind of in a sales game and in a marketing game is probably step one. I lay out here 3 three pillars behind what I think has been a very successful winning deal sourcing engine for a lot of our customers in the lower middle market. First is a memorable online narrative. Two, high levels of discoverability and reputation and credibility. And three, a tech stack and a software-based approach to origination. Interestingly, just drafting, I guess, off of the pattern presentation, if you are a brand in the investment business, you have an advantage. So you shouldn't just think about the e-commerce companies that you're looking to acquire and the efficacy of their brand. You should be looking at the efficacy of your brand as a way to reach those owners when they're considering selling. I think a great number of professional investors spend a lot of time thinking about valuation and EBITDA and underwriting and spend very little time thinking about what is the brand that they are building with their investment firm and how does that brand put them in a position to attract great entrepreneurs that are contemplating the exit or to attract the advisors who are entrusted to run the process. I have, some of you guys may know Bill. I thought it was a worthwhile selection for the e-commerce summit. Bill is a longtime buyer of pet businesses. Started out running a holding company, converted the holding company 100% into a pet-oriented holding company, and then recently sold that business to Food Science in sort of like a full unload of his pet products holding company. Now he's in corporate development there. I will tell you that on Axial, the minute that the sell side receives an indication of interest from the buy side on a particular deal, the sell side almost always goes straight to LinkedIn and looks at your LinkedIn profile. So having a LinkedIn profile that's very clear about what you're looking for, the kinds of businesses that you're acquiring, it's highly trafficked, and it's a really important place for you to be able to start the conversation. I think Bill's done a pretty clear job of laying out all that he cares about from a professional perspective, which is continuing to acquire pet brands. When you're a specialist, so for those of you who are specialized in pursuing technology businesses or e-commerce businesses, you have an advantage, and you need to take advantage of that. It's harder to be memorable when you're a generalist. You can see here Blackstone working very hard, obviously real estate, private credit, software, industrials, warehousing, data centers. They have a huge remit where they want to put capital to work. So the way they think about positioning their brand and creating reach online is very, very different than someone like Bill, who can be very, very precise. Your investment program and what you're focused on should sort of indicate how you think about a narrow versus a more generalist brand. I think a lot of permanent equity is a permanent capital buyer of sort of quote unquote boring businesses in the American lower middle market. They have a writing background at that firm. Unsurprisingly, they're based in University of Missouri, town of Columbia, which is where the #1 American journalism school is. So unsurprised that they write a lot and produce a lot of content. This has created a real flywheel of inbound deal flow for them over time. Everybody in this room has a series of experiences, a series of transaction experiences or related that you could easily codify in the context of some amount of content on your website or on your LinkedIn page. I think a lot of people have kind of imposter syndrome here and are hesitant to document that. It really does. It can really help. It can really be a real advantage. Permanent equity is in probably chapter 7 or chapter 8 of building a content machine around their investment business. But you can get started quite quickly. This is an example of somebody who's now rolling up MSPs and in the IT services category. And he's out of the blocks with an MSP owner podcast. It's a way for him to reach owners. And podcasts are actually a lot easier than writing too. It's a lot easier to talk than it is to collect your thoughts in writing. So you can just see different kinds of organizations. This is a one-man operation all the way to, Blackstone and everything in between. It's not something that you can't do just because you don't, have a big enough team. It's really about just being determined to do it. But it's the barriers to entry are fairly low. There are many places on the internet now where you can be discovered and be found. This is a profile page on Axial that shows different private equity firms and how they're ranked and sorted. This is a PitchBook page that's publicly indexed. It's effectively an SEO optimized profile, maybe even geo optimized as well. But making sure that the world can find you when they run either a AI search or a Google search, and making sure that the world understands your transaction history. You just don't I don't think it pays to be quiet on these things or to be stealthy on these things. I think stealth is overrated. Today, I think people really just want to know who you are and where you've been and why they should consider talking to you in the context of a sale process. And so being highly visible in these settings is fairly easy. This is just some data on like the visibility of different profiles on Axial and how that correlates to the number of buyers on Axial who are successfully closing. So I'm going to move pretty quickly on discoverability, because I've already covered a lot of this. I will say that there are many, many brokers and M&A advisors who still believe in press releases as a form of credibility. Daisy is a buyer of smart home automation businesses. She's a very, very smart entrepreneur. She's got a ton of technology venture capital behind us, but she's rolling out press releases, a very old school media technique, in order to win visibility and win notoriety within this category. So your origination should match the categories where you're trying to source. If you're trying to source very old, boring businesses, obviously, getting written up in like the technology rags doesn't make any sense. You need to sort of go where the owners are and go where the owners' advisors are. I will skip this for the for expediency, but one of the things that I think is an interesting chart. It's a boring looking slide, but on the Axial platform, the sell side does not list their deal. They run a private process and they select who they're going to approach. And sometimes they ignore people that would be a great fit because they don't know better. And on Axial, what we do is permit those people that were excluded from the M&A process to inquire anonymously and make a case for why they should be included in the transaction. And it's a way for an underdog to get into a process when they were excluded because they're not a well-known name or it's not clear that they're well capitalized. And so this sort of shows the distribution of deals that are subject to that level of exclusivity. Not all the deals are being sent to all of the recommended buyers. And what you can see here on this next slide is that over half the people who take the time to inquire and reach out to the sell side advisor who's running the process ultimately get into the transaction. So just elbow grease when you have the opportunity pays off more than 50% of the time. You can see that, those who are getting admitted into these transactions tend to be the most well capitalized. So 60% of the time, a family office or a corporate acquirer, whereas search funds 46% of the time. But the percentages were actually quite surprising to us. I'm going to cut through a lot of this. This is a slide here that has a stack of technology tools that we see being used a lot. Happy to send these slides. Emmett and his team have them, but more than happy to share these slides and with anybody who wants them. The one parting piece of advice before 9:45 is the tools on this page give everybody these enormous mail guns. And what I can tell you as a business owner myself is the amount of sort of unrefined inbound, both from the investment banking as well as from the professional buy-side community. It's really high. And some of it is quite bad and very, very unimpressive. And what I would encourage, so this is an example of, this is me sort of making fun of someone who I thought reached out to me and in a really unimpressive way. And I contrast that with PSG, which is a software acquirer, big software fund up in Boston that clearly spent the time to think about who Axial is, think about who I am as the owner of that business, and then put together an outbound email that made a lot of sense and that resonated. So just encourage everybody in the room, It does take more work. You do have to go more slowly, but I would encourage everybody to resist the automation temptation. I think it does turn off a lot of advisors and a lot of owners. And slow and steady, ironically, is it's almost like when you write someone a handwritten thank you note these days, nobody writes them anymore. So when you do it, it really, really stands out. So those are the three pillars. Here's a resource for those of you who are interested in looking at all the advisors active in the lower middle market. And Emmett, thanks again for the opportunity.